The story begins long before the barbed wire, before the number burned into skin, before Auschwitz became a word that condensed an entire civilization's failure. It begins in a land that had already learned how domination works when it does not announce itself loudly, but arrives quietly, reshaping daily life until fear becomes routine. Poland had lived under occupation before. It understood that conquest was not only about territory, but about memory, language, and conscience. When Maximilian Kolbe was born in January of 1894, Poland existed more as an idea than a nation. Its borders were erased, but its identity survived through culture and faith. Catholicism was not merely belief, it was continuity. Churches were places where history was preserved, where polishness could still exist without permission. This is why, decades later, the clergy would be targeted so methodically. Not because priests were armed, but because they carried something regimes cannot fully control, loyalty that does not originate from power. By the time Nazi Germany invaded Poland in 1939, this understanding became lethal. The invasion was swift, but what followed was slower and more deliberate. Universities were shut down, professors disappeared. Writers were executed. Priests were arrested in numbers wildly disproportionate to their role in any resistance movement. The goal was not order. It was sterilization of influence. Nepokolona, the monastery Kolbe had founded, existed in direct contradiction to that goal. It was not silent. It was not invisible. Printing presses ran day and night. Ideas moved constantly. Words crossed borders faster than soldiers. For a regime obsessed with total narrative control, this was intolerable. Even when Kolbe avoided political language, truth itself became a provocation. Fear arrived gradually. First as rumors, then as arrests in nearby towns, then as the sound of trucks at night. The knock on the door that came too late or too early, the uncertainty was the point. Kolbe and his friars lived under constant pressure. Every decision felt provisional. Every morning carried the possibility of disappearance. Courage, here, did not look heroic. It looked like continuing ordinary life under extraordinary threat. When Kolbe was arrested the first time and later released, it did not bring relief. It marked release meant surveillance. It meant being known. When he was arrested again, there was no confusion. This time, the system had decided his trajectory. The transport to Auschwitz was not immediate clarity. It was disorientation. Prisoners were packed into cattle cars, designed to erase individuality before arrival. No windows, little air, no sense of time. The smell was overwhelming. Sweat, fear, human waste. People pressed together until bodies stopped feeling like bodies. Hours passed, maybe days. No one could be sure. This was the first stage of dehumanization. Not violence, but uncertainty. The mind searched for reference points and found none. When the doors finally opened, the shock was physical. Light, shouting, dogs, orders in a language some understood and others did not. Confusion was punished immediately. There was no explanation, only correction through force. Auschwitz announced itself not with spectacle, but with procedure. Hair shaved, clothing taken, names erased, numbers assigned. This was not done violently at first. It was efficient, bureaucratic that made it worse. Violence would have confirmed danger. Procedure suggested permanence. Kolbe entered a world governed by exhaustion. The air carried a constant smell of smoke and damp fabric. Barracks were overcrowded. Sleep became a negotiation between space and fatigue. Hunger arrived quickly, at first as discomfort, then as fixation, then as distortion of thought. Every day followed the same structure. Roll call before dawn, standing motionless for hours, regardless of weather. Heat, cold, rain, none altered the ritual. Men collapsed. Some were beaten, others were left where they fell as warnings. Work followed not productive labor, but exhausting repetition. Carrying stones, digging trenches that would later be filled. Purpose was irrelevant. The goal was depletion. Kolbe's body was failing even before the camp accelerated it. Tuberculosis had already damaged his lungs. He was thin, weak, frequently short of breath. Guards noticed. Weakness attracted attention. Blows came without explanation. Other prisoners, terrified of collective punishment, sometimes turned their frustration inward. Hunger eroded solidarity. Survival narrowed moral vision. This is where the narrative resists simplification. Kolbe was afraid. Not theatrically, not constantly, but persistently. At night, lying on wooden planks, listening to coughing, murmured prayers, quiet sobs. And sometimes nothing at all. He felt the pressure of uncertainty. How long can this continue? How much suffering can be endured before the body simply fails? These were not spiritual questions. They were physiological, psychological, deeply human. Days blurred together. Repetition dissolved meaning. The same commands, the same insults, the same hunger. Over time, hunger altered perception. Thoughts slowed. Tempers shortened. Small conflicts erupted over crumbs, over imagined slights, over space measured in inches. Friendships became dangerous because attachment increased vulnerability. Kolbe moved through this environment quietly. He did not preach constantly. He did not draw attention. He listened. He shared food when he could, even when it meant greater weakness later. Sometimes he had nothing left to give but presence. At night, when guards were distant, he whispered prayers. Some joined. Others listened in silence. In Auschwitz, belief was dangerous not because it provoked punishment, but because it preserved interior freedom, and freedom sharpened suffering. Then came the escape. One man failed to return from a work detail. The response was immediate and ritualized. Entire blocks were assembled. Hours passed under the open sky. No explanation. Just waiting. Waiting was the punishment. It magnified fear. When the selections began, the logic was clear. 10 men would die by starvation. Not execution. Starvation. Time weaponized. When Franciszek Gajowniczek was selected, his restraint collapsed. He cried out for his wife and children. The sound cut through the numbness. It reminded everyone of the world beyond the fence. Kolbe stepped forward. This was not instinct. It was not impulse. It was decision. He knew what starvation meant. Everyone did. The bunker was not a mystery. It was a sentence measured in days and silence. The commandant asked who he was. A Catholic priest, Kolbe replied. No speech. No moral confrontation. Just a bureaucratic exchange. The substitution was accepted. The bunker was designed to dissolve the mind before the body. Darkness. Damp air. No food. Minimal water. Time became viscous. At first, voices filled the space. Prayer. Hymns. The rosary. Sound became the only resistance. Other prisoners paused nearby, listening. Some prayed along. Others simply stood, absorbing the anomaly. Days passed. Hunger intensified. Voices weakened. Prayers slowed. One by one, the voices disappeared. Silence expanded. Silence became heavy, almost audible. Time lost shape. There were no markers, no mornings, no nights, only waiting. Kolbe remained, alone, conscious, extremely weak. Silence pressing in from all sides. When guards finally entered, they did not find madness. They found composure. The injection ended it quickly. After war, Gajowniczek survived. He returned to his family. He spent decades telling the story. Kolbe's death did not end his influence. It exposed the limit of absolute power. The system could decide who would die. It could not decide who would choose to die. That is why he still unsettles. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. Like the video, share it, and leave a comment with your suggestions for future themes or historical figures you would like to see explored.